My parents were already celebrating, laughing, planning trips, arguing over who'd get which house when Grandpa leaned close to me, slipped something into my hand, and whispered, "This is what really matters." They thought they'd won everything. They were wrong. When my grandfather passed away, my parents believed the story was over. The will was read, the assets were listed, and every valuable thing went to them. I was left with nothing, at least that's what everyone thought. But what they didn't notice was the moment Grandpa changed my future with one quiet gesture that would outlast money, property, and pride. The day the will was read felt less like a moment of mourning and more like a business meeting they'd been waiting years to attend. My parents sat up straighter with every sentence the lawyer read, their faces lighting up as properties were listed and account numbers were confirmed. There was no pause, no shared silence for the man who had just been buried. Instead, there were whispers about which land would sell fastest, which house could be flipped, and how soon they could trade in their cars for newer, louder symbols of success. Their excitement wasn't subtle, it spilled into the room like they were afraid joy might lose value if they didn't spend it immediately. What struck me most wasn't that I was left out of the conversation. It was that I was invisible in it. No one glanced in my direction. No one asked if I was okay, or if I needed time, or even if I wanted to step outside. I was sitting right there, still processing the loss of the one person who had ever really seen me, yet I might as well have been a piece of furniture. In that moment, I understood something that had taken years to form but only seconds to confirm. This wasn't about family. It was about entitlement. As they talked, I replayed memories of Grandpa in my mind, how he valued patience, how he measured people not by what they owned but by what they protected. He used to say that money reveals more than it provides. And watching my parents that day, I finally understood what he meant. The inheritance didn't change them. It exposed them. Their sense of victory wasn't rooted in gratitude or responsibility. It was fueled by a belief that they were owed everything simply for existing. I realized then that character shows itself most clearly when no one thinks it's being judged. In a room meant for closure, they saw opportunity. In a moment meant for reflection, they saw reward. The absence of compassion wasn't accidental, it was habitual. And that absence spoke louder than any number the lawyer read aloud. It told me exactly where I stood in their world, and exactly why Grandpa had chosen differently. Sitting there, quiet and overlooked, I felt an unexpected calm. It wasn't the numbness of shock, but the clarity of truth finally settling in. I didn't feel cheated. I felt released. Released from expecting warmth where there was none. Released from mistaking obligation for love. Their celebration wasn't a win, it was a confession. It revealed what they valued, and more importantly, what they didn't. That was the moment I understood that real inheritance isn't measured in acres or bank statements. It's measured in how you treat people when you think you've already won. And in that room, while they counted their gains, they unknowingly declared their loss. While everyone focused on numbers and names, Grandpa had already made his choice long before the will was ever read. He understood that money attracts attention, but wisdom attracts longevity. What he gave me wasn't cash or property, it was knowledge, guidance, and proof of trust built slowly over time. He knew that if he handed me wealth without preparation, it would disappear as quickly as it arrived. So instead, he prepared me quietly, patiently, in ways no one else thought to notice. The notebook he gave me didn't look valuable. Its cover was worn, the pages slightly yellowed, filled with uneven handwriting and notes written at different stages of his life. But inside were lessons you couldn't buy, mistakes he made, deals he walked away from, people he trusted too easily, and moments when patience saved him from ruin. He wrote about discipline, about never spending money to impress people who didn't care, and about choosing stability over ego. Every line felt like a conversation he knew we'd never get to finish. The documents matter too, but not in the way my parents expected. They weren't flashy contracts or immediate payouts. They were records, instructions, proof of decisions made decades earlier. They showed how he built what he had, how he protected it, and how he thought long-term when others chased quick wins. Reading them felt like stepping into his mind, seeing the world through someone who understood that real security is built slowly, layer by layer. What mattered most, though, was the years of quiet preparation he shared only with me. He taught me by example, not lectures. I was the one he asked to help organize papers, to sit beside him while he balanced accounts, to listen while he talked through choices out loud. At the time, it felt ordinary. I didn't realize I was being trained while everyone else was being entertained. He wasn't looking for applause, he was looking for reliability. He watched who showed up without being asked, who listened without interrupting, who didn't roll their eyes when the conversations weren't exciting. Consistency mattered more to him than charm. While others made noise, demanded recognition, or argued over what they deserved, I was learning how systems worked, how patience compounds, and how responsibility isn't something you announce, it's something you practice. Grandpa believed trust wasn't given in a single moment, it was earned in hundreds of small ones. Every time I followed through, every time I stayed when it was inconvenient, every time I treated his time and experience with respect, he took note. He didn't need to explain his decision to anyone else. He already knew who would protect what he built and who would burn through it chasing approval. That's why his gift lasted. Money can be divided, spent, and fought over. Knowledge grows when it's used. Guidance multiplies when it's applied. Trust, once earned, becomes a foundation no one can shake. Grandpa didn't reward noise. He rewarded consistency. And in doing so, he gave me something far more powerful than an inheritance. He gave me the ability to build one of my own. My parents believed wealth was something you displayed: cars parked in driveways, photos taken on expensive vacations, stories told loudly so others would notice. To them, money only mattered once it could be seen, admired, and envied. Grandpa never saw it that way. He believed real wealth was quiet. It was built slowly, patiently, often without witnesses. While my parents chased the appearance of success, Grandpa invested in the process that creates it. Most nights, when the house was loud with television and complaints, I was sitting with Grandpa at the kitchen table. Sometimes we talked about money, but more often we talked about choices, why some people always seemed desperate, despite earning more, and why others stayed steady even when life knocked them down. He taught me that wealth wasn't about what you owned, but what you understood. Understanding compound interest, responsibility, discipline, and timing mattered more than any sudden windfall. Those lessons didn't feel valuable in the moment. They didn't sparkle, but they stayed. When Grandpa needed help sorting papers, organizing old records, or simply keeping him company, I showed up. Not because I expected anything, but because he mattered. My parents rarely noticed. To them, those hours looked like wasted time. They didn't see the way Grandpa watched quietly, measuring not my effort, but my consistency. He was paying attention to who stayed when there was nothing to gain, they assumed. Inheritance was something dramatic, announced in a lawyer's office with everyone sitting upright, waiting to hear their name. Grandpa knew better. He understood that what's handed out publicly is often spent quickly, argued over, and forgotten. What's handed over privately has time to take root. The real inheritance wasn't a check or a title, it was access. Access to his thinking, his mistakes, his hard-earned wisdom, and the trust that I wouldn't treat it lightly. Late at night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Grandpa would share stories about deals that failed, chances he missed, and risks he wished he'd taken sooner. He didn't glorify success. He explained the cost of it. He showed me how patience outperforms impulse, how silence can be strength, and how building something lasting means resisting the urge to show it off too soon. Those conversations became my foundation. My parents never heard those talks. They were too busy chasing the next visible win. They didn't realize that while they were waiting for an announcement, Grandpa was already passing the torch. By the time his will was read, the transfer had already happened. What he gave me couldn't be taken away, spent recklessly, or divided in court. It lived in how I thought, how I planned, and how I moved through the world. That's why they didn't see it coming. They were listening for applause. Grandpa was watching for character. And in the quiet moments, when no one else was paying attention, he handed me the one inheritance that actually lasts. Years later, the money they fought over was gone, spent in pieces so small, they barely remembered what it was supposed to represent. What once caused arguments at family dinners became footnotes in old conversations, stories that ended with excuses and blame. The houses were sold, the savings accounts drained, and the excitement they once celebrated faded into quiet resentment. What they inherited required constant protection and explanation. What I received required patience, and it multiplied on its own. What Grandpa gave me didn't arrive all at once. And that was the point. It showed up in the way I learned to make decisions without needing approval, in the confidence to walk away from shortcuts, and in the ability to delay comfort for something better. He taught me that money is loud but temporary, while discipline is silent and permanent. Every lesson he passed on became a tool I could use again and again, no matter where I found myself. At first, the growth wasn't obvious. There were no sudden wins or dramatic moments where everything clicked. Instead, there were small choices that stacked up over time, saying no when it would have been easier to say yes, learning instead of complaining, building instead of borrowing. Those choices didn't impress anyone at family gatherings, but they slowly reshaped my life. While others measured success by what they could show, I measured it by how little I needed from anyone else. Independence became my real inheritance, not just financial independence, but emotional independence, the freedom to live without needing validation from people who once decided my worth with a signature. Confidence followed naturally, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that stays steady under pressure. I knew I could adapt, rebuild, and keep moving forward because Grandpa had already shown me how. What surprised me most was how transferable his gift was. Jobs changed, markets shifted, relationships came and went, yet the mindset he gave me remained useful in every season. It helped me recognize opportunities others ignored and walk away from traps disguised as rewards. It gave me the courage to think long-term in a world obsessed with quick wins. Meanwhile, the fortune my parents celebrated became a burden they never expected. Managing it created tension, spending it created regret, losing it created blame. They inherited something that demanded constant defense. I inherited something that quietly defended me. Looking back, I understand why Grandpa did it this way. He knew that money without mindset disappears, but mindset without money eventually creates its own path. He didn't want to give me something I could lose. He wanted to give me something I couldn't unlearn. That's why his real legacy didn't show up in a courtroom or on a balance sheet. It showed up in the life I was able to build when no one was watching. I didn't inherit his fortune. I inherited his way of thinking. And unlike money, that kind of inheritance doesn't shrink when it's used, it grows. Not every blessing comes with applause. Sometimes the most powerful gifts are given quietly to the ones who show up when no one is watching. If you've ever felt overlooked, remember this. What truly matters often isn't announced, it's entrusted. And when you carry it well, it changes everything.